I'm always in awe in a certain way of the overcomingness that people have. And I think that focusing only on what's wrong with people, or mainly on what's wrong with people, creates a false impression of people, because people are resilient. I mean, you see people in the poorest countries in the world being generous with other people. You see them surviving things that I'm not sure I could survive. And so I want to make sure that both of those sides are balanced when I'm having a conversation with people.
Welcome to episode number 198 of the Couples Therapist Couch.
Welcome to the Couples Therapist Couch, the podcast for couples therapists, marriage counselors, and relationship coaches to explore the practice of couples therapy. And now, your host, Shane Birkel.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Couples Therapist Couch. This is your host, Shane Birkel, and this is the podcast that's all about the practice of couples therapy. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you enjoy the episode and you want to be part of a community, then definitely join the Couples Therapist Couch Facebook group. That's completely free. Obviously, you can always join the Couples Therapist Inner Circle, which is the paid basically an amazing supervision group where we talk about couples therapy. Therapists ask questions. There's a ton of course material on working with affairs, working with emotionally focused therapy, doing relational life therapy, all kinds of different course material that you can get access to. And I'm really excited. I'm sort of revamping the whole inner circle, and there's a new business option which is about building your couples therapy practice, which it could be an add-on to the clinical side of things if that's something that's a good fit for you. So go over to the website and check it out. You can get a lot more details and information. I don't want to take too much time talking about it here on the podcast, but it's something you should definitely take a look at if it feels like that could be a good fit for you. Today, I was able to catch up with Bill O'Hanlon, who I also spoke with on episode number 25 of the podcast. So if you enjoy our conversation today, you might also want to go back and listen to episode number 25. Bill is, in my mind, a legend in the field of psychotherapy. He's done a ton of teaching. He's written, I think it's 41 books related to relationships, therapy, hypnosis, all kinds of different topics. And he's just such a great character to talk to and catch up with. And he always has so much really valuable stuff to say. And I always learn a lot in our conversations. So without further introduction, here is the interview with Bill O'Hanlon. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Couples Therapist Couch. This is Shane Birkel, and today I'm speaking with Bill O'Hanlon, songwriter, author, public speaker, and psychotherapy and hypnosis teacher. Hey, Bill, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Shane. Thanks for having me. Good to see you. Good to see a fellow Omahan.
Yeah, that's right. We were just talking about how we're both from Nebraska, which is unusual. But I forgot to look what episode you were on before, but Bill was on the podcast a few years ago. So I'll put that in the show notes. I'll mention it in the introduction when I record it later. But people enjoy this conversation, they can go back and listen to your other interview that we had then. But I'm really interested in talking more about the solution-oriented approach to therapy, which you were the co-founder of. And I know you studied under Milton Erickson. But why don't you start with telling everyone a little bit more about yourself?
Yeah, well, again, I was born in Omaha, but I didn't grow up there. I grew up in the Chicago area, and then I moved back to the Omaha area later in my life. Had a family there, and I was a shy kid when I was growing up. I have a cousin who came to see me do some of my public speaking one time, and she said, "That's the most unlikely profession I can imagine going into. I never heard you talk till you were 18." And so I was a really shy kid, kind of anxious, and big family, 8 kids. And I moved away for college. I moved from the Chicago area to Arizona State, Phoenix area. And I think I got kind of lost there. So I had some mental health issues myself. I got depressed and I was pretty isolated, pretty lonely. And that, through a roundabout series of events, led me to becoming interested in psychology and psychotherapy. Once I studied psychology, I realized, oh, it's not psychology I'm really interested in, it's psychotherapy. It's how to help people solve their problems, be less miserable. And growing up in a family as I did, it was sort of the heyday of systemic therapies, and Gay Haley had written a book about Milton Erickson's work, and that was through the framework of marriage and family therapy. And I thought, well, that makes sense. It's not like you blame anybody, any individual, for what's going on or when they have problems. There's an ecology around them. There's a system around them that has influenced them and continues to influence them. So if you can work with that, you can do work that doesn't involve blaming people. It just involves helping people change. And so that appealed to me a great deal. So I got really into couples and family therapy. That's what I majored in as my master's degree at Arizona State. And while I was studying my undergraduate degree in psychology, and then later in my graduate stuff, I came across Milton Erickson. I met him in person through some strange circumstances. And then I studied with him when I was actually in graduate school. And that warped me in a particular way, just what you're saying about solutions. He was a quirky guy, and he's a psychiatrist, but he wasn't big on medicines. He was much more big on helping people change. And he had a very different approach from everything else I'd studied. And he was really interested in people's capabilities and resources more than their deficits and pathologies. And that had a big influence on me because, again, I was really sensitive growing up to being blamed. And so I mentioned that earlier. I thought, well, that's kind of cool about family and couples therapy. You can sort of spread the accountability around and you don't have to blame anybody. And then I came across his approach, which said, well, instead of focusing on what's wrong with people, you could focus on the resources and strengths they had. And that led me and some other people to develop this solution-oriented approach, which is doing a sort of a positive excavation in the midst of problems for where are the resources, strengths, previous solutions, future solutions. And that came to be called in one approach, the solution-focused approach, and in my approach, solution-oriented approach, which I co-founded with Michelle Winter-Davis. And we wrote a book about that called In Search of Solutions. And that was revolutionary for me. I had done a lot of different approaches and been influenced by a lot of Carl Rogers and, as most other people, cognitive behavioral therapies, and coming up with my own slant on things really helped. It gave me a center from which to do work. So I no longer had to be the expert that figured out what the real problem was and how to solve that problem. I was in collaboration with my couple, family, individual clients and trying to evoke their natural problem-solving abilities and resources and strengths and refocus the conversation into a more productive and positive direction that was focused on solutions.
Yeah, that's great. And I think it's a whole framework for how you see the world when you start having these conversations in a different way and you start asking people different questions that are more solution oriented. It helps people think differently. But I am curious, what is your perspective about talking about things that happened in the past or using information about people's history or family of origin and things like that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to talk about what people want to talk about. They come in and it's not like, oh, I'm not going to talk about that stuff. It's a bunch of junk and I don't believe in it. No, I mean, you listen respectfully. And when people bring up, it's like, I grew up in this alcoholic family, or, my father cheated on my mother, and I think that's what led me to, and I'm like, okay, well, what did you take from that made you, sensitive in relationships? And how did you decide you wanted to do your life differently? And so you can use those past discussions as an entryway into solutions and possibilities and resources and strengths. So I'm happy to talk about past. I'm happy to talk about genetics. I'm happy to talk about biochemistry. It's like, okay, given the fact that you realized that you were ADHD is somewhere along the line, how have you gotten so far based on having that kind of neurochemistry and, neurology? And so I'm always curious, I'm sure you've seen people. I've seen clients that I don't know, you never know until you get there. But if I had lived their lives, I don't think I could have survived it. They were in desperate conditions, abused and, poverty ridden and, violence in their lives and, terrible stuff happened and, terrible genetic or biochemical backgrounds. And somehow, they made it to my office somehow, some way. They've suffered serious bouts of depression or, other kinds of things. And somehow they show up in my office, we have a conversation, and I'm always in awe in a certain way of the overcomingness that people have. And I think that focusing only on what's wrong with people, or mainly on what's wrong with people, creates a false impression of people, because people are resilient. I mean, you see people in the poorest countries in the world being generous with other people. You see them surviving things that I'm not sure I could survive. And so I want to make sure that both of those sides are balanced when I'm having a conversation with people, the past, the present, the future. And I think some therapies focus only on one thing, their cognitions or the past or their genetics or their biochemistry or their trauma or whatever. And I'm like, yeah, I'll talk about any of that stuff. I think it's all relevant. Mm-hmm. What do we do with it now? Rather than give you a diagnosis that just says you're screwed. You have severe manic depression, or bipolar disorder, and you're just going to be living with that the rest of your life. I'm like, yeah, okay, that's the conditions in which you find yourself. How have you overcome that in some times? How have you compensated for it in some ways? I think, I got abused when I was younger, sexually abused, and I think it made me a better author and a better speaker, because in compensation, the way that person manipulated me into the abuse was confuse me. In compensation, I learned to be a really great outliner, because I wanted to understand things that were confusing, because I was anxious when I was in a confusing situation. So I developed a compensatory skill that helped me write 41 books so far and, teach a bunch of workshops that I outline usually pretty clearly and pretty well. So I'm interested in balancing out that conversation, which is sort of why I changed the name of my work from solution-oriented to possibility, because I'm thinking, they could get worse, they could get better, they could stay about the same, and they have deficits and pathologies and challenges, and they have resources and abilities and solutions. I want to balance all that. And my main thing is open a possibility so they can move forward and not be stuck.
Yeah. And I don't know if you use this terminology, but I was thinking about beliefs, like limiting beliefs specifically. When you talk about those problems, like, you grew up in this situation, a lot of people sort of feel like they're a victim and they feel worthless. And, just the way that you were asking the question, that's more like, what did you learn from that situation? How did you survive? How did you get through it? You're sort of programming a different sort of belief into their mind, which is, I am someone who can, survive through something like that.
Right. And I think when you have that conversation, people's views, as you say, their limiting beliefs and their general beliefs sometimes shift, and they don't see the problem in the same way. And so I'm again, I was raised as a therapist during this time. It's called social constructionism, that how we talk about and interact about problems creates the form of the problem, the fixed form of the problem. So yes, I think when you ask different questions, sometimes that what used to look like an intractable problem dissolves or starts to yield a little more to oh, maybe things can change. And so I think those conversations are very important to have. And, I think, you specialize in couples therapy, and so did I. There was something, couples being in a relationship can be the most amazing and rewarding and loving thing. And it can be the worst nightmare of your life if it goes bad. It can be torture. You live with someone and sometimes you feel more alone than if you were alone, if it's gone bad. And so for me, those family and couples relationships, love is what makes the world go around, and it motivates a lot of things. You mentioned I'm doing songwriting now. It was great to be a couples therapist for 40 years because I have so much material for writing songs, because 3/4 of the songs that are out there are about relationships, longing for someone, having, being in love with someone, wanting them to be happy, and being, losing someone, whether through breakup or death, and longing for, remembering them with, love, or remembering them with bitterness if it was a bad breakup. Relationships are so central to our lives and our happiness often, that it's a really meaningful thing to be able to have skills to help couples dissolve the barriers to love, dissolve their problems that are poisoning their relationship or keeping them apart or making them miserable. It's a sacred task, I think. And I really felt the privilege that couples would let me in, because, I think you and I were men. And it's like somebody suggests we go to couples therapy, and we're like, I'm not airing my dirty laundry and I'm not being vulnerable in front of someone else. If you get a couple in, it took a lot for one of those or both of those people to come in and bare their souls to you and tell you what their issues are and bring you into that. And I think that's a privilege and a sacred duty to, to help people, if they can, stay together and get along.
Yeah, that's great. I love looking at it like that. And what do you think is the biggest opportunity we have as couples therapists? When we get people at that moment where they're struggling and they're finally coming in for help, I feel like, it's really important to sort of think about how we approach the moment.
Yeah, I think, again, it's part of it is to have them not shut down the possibilities, and because they come in and I don't love him anymore, I don't love her anymore, or they had an affair and I can't forgive. And it's like, well, yeah, that's where you are in this moment. But I may have told this story before. I can't remember when I was on before, but early on, when I was becoming a marriage and family therapist, I lived in Arizona, and I went to a party. And again, shy guy, I didn't like to go to parties, but I came to a friend's party, and there was an older couple there that were celebrating their 50th wedding anniversary. And so everybody's, out and about, and I get seated next to the woman in that relationship. And I just was like, okay, I'm becoming a marriage and family therapist. I saw you interact with your husband. You two look like you're in love, and you look like you really appreciate and love each other, and, have fun with each other. I'm not married yet. I don't have any kids, and, I've had relationships, but I'm not married. What's the secret? Like, how do I get that in 50 years if I meet the person that I want to be with? And she said, well, she stops for a minute. She says, I've been married to 5 guys. I go, whoa, you went through 4 guys before you got to this? And it's pretty unusual for people that age to have been divorced that many times. She goes, oh no, I never divorced. This guy, he was 5 different guys. I first met him, he was young and impetuous and, handsome as the devil. And I fell in love with that guy. And then, we get in our 20s, and he gets a job, and he gets serious, and he had a serious job, and he was boring. He'd come home, all he wanted to do was talk about his work, and it was boring. And I was like, where was that young, wild, dreamy teenager that I met, but I learned to love that one. And then, we hit middle age, and we both grew in different directions. And we had to, I didn't like him at times. I hated him at moments. And I learned to love that one. And then he changed again. And now look at him. And she looks over there. She grabs her arm. She goes, look at that stuff hanging off his arms. She said, he was a hulking, young teenager. And now he's got this skin hanging off, and I learned to love that one too. I've learned to love 5 different guys. He's gone through 5 different things. And I'm sure I've gone through that too. And I thought, that's a really wise thing, because people come in the midst of their most difficult moments and they think this is it. This is the truth about my relationship. I don't love him anymore. I don't love her anymore. He's a jerk. She's a controller, whatever. And if you can get them through that and not alienate each other and not give up on the possibilities that something could change. Now, it doesn't always, sometimes you're with the wrong person and you just can't make it work, or it's violence, the beyond the pale. You just can't make it work, but more times than not, I would see couples going over the cliff, like their relationship was done. And I would grab them by the back of their shirt, turn them around, have a different conversation. Sometimes they would fall deeply in love with that new version of their relationship and that person. I think that's one thing to keep in mind, is that we conclude from the moment what our feelings are going to be in the future, what they were in the past. Sometimes I never really loved him. I just married him out of, whatever.
Right.
People make conclusions that are a little too rigid. I think feelings are flexible. And I wrote a book called Love is a Verb. And I think depending on how you communicate, talk, behave, feelings can change at any moment. At any moment, you can fall deeply in love with this person again, even if you think you hate him or don't love him anymore, or you lost all passion and all feelings. I've seen it happen. And I think people that aren't in this field don't know that. You've seen it, sometimes like people come in and you think, okay, they're on, they don't usually come to your office for a little tune-up. They come into your office on the way to divorce court often, or on the way to break up, or they've already broken up. And I've seen it turn around, and I'm sure you have too. And that gives me kind of hope. And I always go in thinking, we can work this out and we can make it work. They can make it work.
Right. And how do you help people move into the acceptance of, my partner's never going to be a hunky 20-year-old strong person again, sort of grieving the reality of what our relationship is at this moment, or grieving the things that don't exist anymore.
Right.
Moving into acceptance versus the things that I really need to stand up for and set boundaries about and say, this isn't okay for me.
Well, I think there's a couple of distinctions there. One is, like sometimes when I've taught, when I've done public speaking, I read the feedback forms. And if someone says like, Bill is ugly, like there's not much I can do about that. If they say Bill talks too fast, I can do something about that. So I focus more on like what's under that person's control. Maybe they could exercise a little more and have a little less, baggy arms, but mainly you got to focus on how they speak to you, how they treat you, how they talk to you, how they touch you, how they, deal with you in every day. I focus, that's why I call it Love is a Verb, because it's more of an action. If that person may not be the handsomest guy or the most beautiful woman in the world or the most desirable or doesn't dress perfectly or whatever, but those actions, they have a big influence on love. And so, we've all known, I used to sit in shopping malls when I was waiting for my partner or my kids, to do shopping. And I would just watch people and I think, look at that guy. He's not very handsome and he's got this beautiful woman. Or look at that woman. She's not very attractive and she's got this hunky guy. How did that happen? And you think probably because they were a pretty nice person and pretty loving person. So I'm more focused on the actions that people take that engender feelings of affection and love and caring. And again, in the couples that I'm seeing, if they've lost that spark, what can they do behaviorally in how they talk to and interact with one another that can engender more warm feelings passionate feelings, loving feelings. That's an easier thing to change than you're ugly or you're controlling. Like, so what does controlling look like? Let's see if we can change any of those behaviors. And then you'll be less likely to be turned off by the controlling nature of that person.
That's great. Can you say a little bit more about how you approach those conversations from a solution-oriented perspective to sort of move people into describing those things?
Yeah, I mean, I used to have this chair with wheels on it, and I remember this couple came in and they were in crisis as typically when people come into the office, and I said, well, what brings you here? And she said, he's passive aggressive. And I was like, oh, shoot, I have a confession to make. During graduate school, I was working a full-time job while I was going to graduate school. I was supporting myself. And I think I fell asleep on the lecture on passive aggressiveness. So I sort of know what you mean, but I'm not quite sure. It was sort of floated in and out while I was sleeping. Can you give me a few examples of what he does that looks like passive aggressiveness to you? And she told me a few examples. One is he would tell her to be home at 8 o'clock. And if he wasn't, he would call. And then he wouldn't call and he wouldn't be home at 8 o'clock. And I go, okay. So one of the things that make a big difference for you is if he kept his word about that. If he called if he was going to be late or came home at the time he said he was going to be. And then I turned to him and I said, and I suspect you have an idea why it would be hard for you to call or to be home at that time. And he would tell me, yeah, I get caught up on work and I forget it. And I know if I call, she's going to yell at me because she thinks I work too much. And so I just put it off. I think of it and then I put it off. And then she gets more mad at me when I'm home. And I go, okay, well, so can we find a way to set a reminder for you? And then I turn to her and I say, can we agree if he actually calls at that moment, it's not a good idea to have the discussion about whether he works too much, but just thank him for letting you know. And all of a sudden we moved out of his personality structure, which is pretty hard to change, or his qualities, which are pretty hard to change, to his behaviors and her behaviors. And that's a lot more changeable. That's why I was saying love is a verb. She could not talk to him about how much he works when he calls and says he's going to be late. And he could set an alarm and he could call or he could be home on time, one of those three. And those are behaviors that are under their control. If I said to her, you need to be less critical, and I said to him, you need to be less passive aggressive, that wouldn't be good. And so, when she said that he's passive aggressive, I rolled my chair away from her. I said, oh, don't get any of that on me. I don't remember what it is, but I remember it was bad. And they laughed. And that sort of lightened them up to be open to this new discussion. So I think you've got to use all these methods to kind of, loosen the jar. So they're not so stuck in those positions of he's bad, she's bad, he's the problem, she's the problem. That doesn't lead anybody anywhere, I don't think, in couples work and in relationships.
Yeah, it's great because when they're focusing on the character, like he's a mean, passive aggressive person, like you said, that's very hard to change. That's very different from this is someone who loves me and cares about me, and they can be passive aggressive at times. And let's focus on how to
absolutely.
make an effort
and let's focus on seeing if we can negotiate that in our relationships. Or she's just like her mother, he's just like his father. Those, I just need to break them down into what does that look like? What does it sound like? And is that changeable? And there are going to be some things that aren't going to be so easy to change. But if we can change any bit of it, it gives them hope that something can change and that it's not all just going downhill and staying really bad. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's great. And I'm curious, with your background in hypnosis, I think a lot of therapists, sort of imagine that there's someone laying on the couch under a trance and, that's how you do hypnosis. And I know that could be part of it, but what, can you explain a little bit more about how that hypnosis is connected to some of the solution-oriented stuff that you do?
Well, it's funny that you asked that, especially in terms of couples therapy. I don't use hypnosis too much. I've done it a little in couples therapy, but when I learned hypnosis, which I was a little freaked out about because Dr. Erickson, who was one of my mentors, did hypnosis all the time, and you couldn't study with him without learning a little hypnosis, and I learned a lot of it, and I liked it. I thought it was really interesting, the kind that he did, which was different from traditional stuff. But one of the first things that happened for me was not using hypnosis in my therapy practice, but realizing how many of my clients were already in a bad trance. Mm-hmm. And so couples get in bad trances with each other. They sort of mutually poorly hypnotize each other into states that aren't fun. And I remember, I at the time when I first learned hypnosis, I was working a lot with a new disorder, which is called bullimorexia. I was one of the specialists in my area on that. And it's now called bulimia, but initially it was called bullimorexia. And my clients with bulimia, who practice bulimia, would go into sort of trances. I remember a client of mine who would come in, we'd do really good work. She'd go out and she'd say to me the next time she came back in, 3 days, things were going really well. And then all of a sudden, it's like I woke up and I had a binge. I don't remember what started it. I don't remember anything during it, but I sort of vaguely realized I had binged and vomited. And I thought, well, that's a lot like what people say in trance. It's sort of dreamlike. And they remember some things afterwards, like a dream, and then it fades. And I was like, wow, these people are in like a trance, but it's a bad trance. And so then I started thinking of that with couples. And when I do hypnosis, what I'm trying to do is validate people where they are, accept them for where they are, sort of Carl Rogers with hypnosis, and open up new possibilities. And what happens in bad trance is the opposite of that. People get invalidated. So we think of couples where they invalidate each other and blame each other, and they close down possibilities. So I realized the couples are in bad trance, and my bulimic clients are in bad trance, and other, post-trauma clients are in bad trances. My job is to join them in that trance and lead them to a better, more healing and possibility-laden trance and solution-oriented trance. And just to wake them up from that bad trance, if I not even put them in, a more healing trance, but just wake them up from a bad trance. And so with couples, I would often interrupt their conversations because they've already done this conversation at home. They're doing it in my office, it's costing more money, and it's the same outcome. Mm-hmm. They get mad at each other, push each other's buttons, and it doesn't go anywhere. And so I'll say, oh, okay. I once saw Virginia Satir doing a demonstration with a couple in a workshop. And they started in their usual thing where they would jab at each other. And she said, well, stop. She'd say, turn around, and I want you to just listen to each other rather than look at each other. Now, and I know that sometimes people get triggered by, pointing fingers or facial expressions like, oh, there she goes, judging me again. She didn't say a word, but she's got that look on her face that he reacts to. And so she turned them around so they couldn't have their usual dance of bad trance. And another time I saw her just physically step in between the couple so they couldn't see each other, and talk to each one and get them in a better place, then turn to the other one, and then move out of the way and have them talk to each other when they were in a better place. And I thought, she's doing that, interrupting the bad trance thing. So that's the first thing I learned about hypnosis and therapy, is to figure out what the bad trance induction that keeps happening individually or systemically, couples or families or work-wise or society-wise, what those bad trances are and how we can interrupt those. And then you can go for healing trances. That's a different matter. And I did hypnosis for 40-something years. I never got to the end of it. It's fascinating, because it teaches you about people's non-conscious, what do I want to say? Processes. Jay Haley, again, who I mentioned, was a marriage and family therapist and pretty well known influence on the field, said he used to send his marriage and family students to get a year's training in hypnosis because they would learn what impact their words have on people's experience. Mm-hmm. And I thought, he said, I never had them use hypnosis in their couples therapy or their family therapy, but they learned the importance of communication and how that influences people's experience. And I thought, yeah, I did learn a lot from hypnosis on the words you choose, the intonations, the rhythms that you use, the pacing of the words, and all that stuff can evoke certain experiences or evoke other experiences. And again, bad trance or not so bad trance or healing trance. So that was really good learning for me with that hypnosis stuff. And then mostly when I did hypnosis, I did individual work, and I did it with a lot of people who had physical problems that didn't yield to medical interventions, like chronic migraine headaches or cluster headaches or chronic pain, or the end of life pain from cancer. And they just, if they gave the person more drugs, they'd be so out of it, they wouldn't really be alive and available for their, family members or their loved ones. And that was a great privilege to be able to relieve, again, that's why I went into this field and why you did too, to relieve suffering. And to be able to do that in a very direct way with hypnosis was pretty cool.
Yeah, that's great. I was thinking when you were talking about the bad trance states with couples, I mean, is there some connection between that and what people describe as fight or flight kind of responses?
Yeah, I think so. I think that, they call them triggers sometimes, and people get triggered by certain voice tones, voice volumes, facial expressions, colors on the wall. I mean, there's all sorts of stuff that can remind one non-consciously of previous experiences, previous people, previous experiences, and can evoke some not so good feelings automatically. And that's what I think trance for me taught me, is how much of our experience is non-conscious and automatic. And it fires off without conscious mediation. We're not thinking about it irrationally. Like when you have a problem in your relationship, you're not rational. You've gotten triggered somehow and you're enraged or you're shamed or whatever. That stuff all fires off so quickly and so automatically by a word or a look or, and you just go into this automatic response. And that was really fascinating to study with hypnosis and to be able to make a difference when we did sort of that healing hypnosis kind of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. And I can totally see how that would help you with couples work, even if you weren't using hypnosis directly with the couples, but just understanding all of that non-conscious stuff that's going on for people and helping them possibly. And I love the creativity it sounds like you use to sort of like interrupt those patterns and things like that, and use humor and all of those things.
Humor and storytelling. And, but again, I remember a particular couple, they were both therapists and they knew I did hypnosis. And they came in and they were just, they had fallen into this pattern where they would just trigger each other. And I just said, okay, I do hypnosis, so I want to do it like a mutual hypnosis. I usually don't do this in couples, but I'm going to do it. She never went into trance. She was still hopped up. And he went right into trance. And when he came out, they had the same conversation and he didn't get triggered in the same way. So then, because he didn't get triggered in the same way, he didn't respond in that way that he responded, and she didn't get triggered in the same way. And they could get past that conversation finally, that interaction that kept triggering both of them, and they could never get through because they would go wild with each other. And, she was still kind of jacked up until he came out of it, and then they started to talk, and he had such a different response. He was more mellowed out. He was more compassionate. He was in a better place. I'd gotten him out of that bad trance, not her, but his interaction with her helped her get out of the bad trance. So that was pretty cool.
Yeah, that's amazing. Amazing. Well, I want to ask you about your creativity. I know a lot of therapists are interested in writing books or doing public speaking. And Anything else we should talk about with couples therapy before we sort of shift directions?
Oh, I think that we covered it pretty well. And yeah, I this is a weird thing to say, but the reason I wrote my first book is that I was pissed off.
Uh-huh.
The reason I wrote, again, probably the first 10 or 15 books, I've written 41. I was so upset about the fact that the field focused so much on pathology and what was wrong with people.
Uh-huh.
And I would have conversations with people and they'd say, well, you got to, or you can't really solve them. And I'm like, no, you don't have to. There's another way. And, you just can't explain that in 5 or 10 minutes very well. So I thought, well, who do people listen to? They listen to people who write books. Those are the experts. So I'm like, okay, the people who write books and give workshops, those are people that people listen to. And shy as I was, I decided to become a speaker and I decided to become a writer. So I think the first thing I have to say to people is you need to have energy to write a book. It takes a while to write a book. It takes a while to get it corrected. It takes a while to get it published. You have to persist, find a publisher, and unless you want to self-publish. But even so, it's a fair amount of work. So don't write a book unless you're passionate about something. You really have something you want to communicate. I needed to communicate. I never liked writing at first. I don't mind it so much anymore, but I didn't like writing. I loved having written. That is, I liked having it done and out in the world because my goal was to influence people. It was the same thing with speaking. I was nervous as all get out when I first became a public speaker because I mentioned to you I was shy and I didn't talk in front of groups. And I was just terrified at first. And then I was really nervous for a while. But that was all secondary to my passion to get my message across because I wanted to change people's minds and move them more in this balanced direction where they were looking at solutions and resources as well as those. So I had a passion to communicate. And that was my goal. I wanted to change minds and I wanted to communicate, and I thought, well, not everybody will like what I'm saying, but all I got to do is find those few people who are open to this idea and who I can sway, because then this idea will carry on beyond me and maybe it'll change one client's life or 100 clients or 1,000 or 1,000,000 clients' lives if I can make a big enough impact. So I think that's the first thing. The second thing for me is I never write a book until I have a really good outline and a really good title. It sometimes might change as time goes along, but I think that's really important. And the third thing is you need to write a proposal, which there's a structure to a proposal. It's basically a business plan for your book. It's the outline. It tells about who you are and what your plan is for writing it and getting it out in the world. And so I think that's good, but if people want to write a book, it's easier to do it these days, especially if you self-publish. I almost always use mainstream publishers because they pay you a little money, anywhere from a psychotherapy book from in my day, 3,000 to 8,000. And for a general public book, for me, it was 25,000 to 75,000 per book. And then you can make more money if the book makes money. So, once I started doing books for the general public, I'm like, wow, this is actually real money. And I still make money from books that I wrote in the 1980s. Mm-hmm. I still get checks from those books. So right. It's helped me live in the Caribbean when I'm older there. I live here for the winter. But so I think, you got to have that passion to do it. And I think it's a cool thing to do. Fewer people read now because there's so much other media that captures our attention, but people still do read. And even people who don't read your books, I've had hundreds of people come up to me through the years say, I've got your book. It's sitting by my bed. I haven't read it, but I wanted to come to the workshop because I wanted to hear what was in those books. They see you as an expert if you've written the book on that topic. So it establishes you as an expert. So does teaching, so does doing public speaking often. So I think that's good. And I wouldn't write a book unless I had a unique something to contribute. It's not like you have to invent a whole new thing like relativity theory or anything. But you have to have your own slant on something. I wrote a book on trauma and I have a different slant on trauma than most therapists. I wrote, some books on couples therapy and I thought I had a different slant than most of the couples therapy books that I've read. So, that's what moves me. I think I've got something to contribute here. who am I being a flaky guy who doesn't like to write or who's shy and doesn't want to get up there and speak because I'm nervous, to decide to withhold that from the world because I have some personal fears or problems or issues or whatever. And I just overcame those because I'm old enough. I was a hippie back in the day, and I felt this desire to contribute to making the world a better place. That was my motivation for writing books. And, I had a little ambition too. I didn't mind being well known and, admired and get some money from my work and things like that. But my main motivation was to make a contribution. So if you've got that, who are you to decide that nobody's, I've heard so many people, oh, I'd write a book, but I'm a nobody. And I'm like, yeah, I want to slap my across, who are you to decide that? Everybody's a nobody until somebody thinks they're somebody. And, if you've got something you want to contribute, go write your book, go out and give a talk, do it for free at first, and then hopefully you'll get paid someday. But put it out there in the world. Don't just sit and think about it or keep that book in a drawer for 50 years, 20 years. Go do it, put it out in the world and run it up a flagpole and see if anybody likes it. There's going to be somebody out there in the world who's going to be changed by that work, typically. And it's going to sometimes save a life. So go do it.
Yeah. And I love what you're saying, as I imagine sitting in front of my computer, feeling stuck, feeling bored, feeling like I don't know what to say, feeling confused about where to go, connecting back to that motivating force that you're talking about, that like this could really help somebody, that could really be what pushes people through to do the work.
Well, it's funny because I was so anxious about public speaking when I started, and I just bulled my way through it. But later people came to me to learn how to be a public speaker and some of the strategies and everything. And I would say, I used to say to people, well, I just was nervous and spoke anyway. And that's not a very helpful thing to say for people who have fear of public speaking. And I finally figured out the second thing to say is, what I realized was when I started, the day when I was doing a public speaking engagement, I would be really nervous right before and right when I started. And as soon as I got involved and I was looking out there on the faces out there, I got so intently focused on, how is this coming? I want to move these people, that I forgot about myself. And so you're sitting there in front of the computer and nothing's coming and you're nervous and you're thinking, oh, who's going to want to read this? I'll never get it published. Don't focus on that. As you say, focus on, this is going to be out in the world and somebody's going to read it and it's going to change their minds or their lives and it's going to contribute to them. If you focus on yourself, you're going to be aware of your, beating hard and your, dry mouth and you're not, oh, what am I doing up here? I'm an imposter. I just focused on them. And that really helped me through fear of speaking, and it helped me through book writing too, because I'm like, yeah, I'm bored. I hate this. I don't want to be sitting on this chair. And someday this book is going to be done and somebody's going to read it and it's going to change their minds. It's going to change their hearts. It's going to contribute and may save somebody's life or may save somebody's marriage or may help them heal from a terrible experience they've had. That's worth the price of admission. I got an email one time and someone said, I read your book and it saved my life. And I was like, okay, that's worth all 41 books sitting in the damn computer chair, all those hours, all hunched over a computer, like that was worth the price of admission. I thought if I did that with one person, that was worth it to me in this world.
Oh, that's cool. Amazing. That's great. Yeah. And do you still have resources for people who are writing books or doing public speaking?
We've talked about this a little offline, but that is, I retired from psychotherapy and I retired from teaching as well, but I had online courses. And a couple of years ago, a guy wrote me, who was one of my workshop sponsors back in the day I was on the circuit, said, whatever happened to all your online courses, like about writing a book and becoming a public speaker and doing hypnosis and, doing solution-oriented therapy and doing couples therapy? And I'm like, it's all online. It's just sitting there. I'm totally off into something else. As I mentioned, I'm into songwriting and pursuing a songwriting career. It's just total fun for me. And I love it. I love every minute of it. I'm going to Nashville every month and write songs with hit songwriters. It's a lot of fun. Had 102 of my songs recorded and released so far, and a bunch in movies and commercials. Incredible.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Amazing. Yeah.
But he took those on, and so once every 2 years, he offers the course in book writing, and once every 2 years, every other year, he offers one on public speaking, and then there are other ones on the clinical topics, hypnosis and happiness science and couples therapy and trauma and stuff like that. So he does probably, I think, 3 or 4 courses a year he offers, and I write the emails and he sends them out, and that's that. So
Nice.
yeah, if you want to go to billohanlon.com, you can register for the email list, and it'll get you information when those things are released.
Great. I'll put that in the show notes. And do you want to say where people can see you performing your music or check
Well,
that
I'm
out?
more of a songwriter than a performer,
Okay.
although I do perform when I go to Nashville. But I will send you a link, and I will send you a link you can put in show notes if people want to look at those of many of the songs that I've written that other people have recorded and released. So I'm not the artist.
Okay.
I used to be a singer songwriter when I was younger, but they're about not all 102 are on Spotify, but about 80 or so of them. So I'll send you a list of those, and you go listen. There's singer-songwriter stuff. There's rap and hip hop. It's fun. I'm having the time of my life writing songs. It's just so much fun just to see if I can do it. I mean, I love music and I love songwriting, and just to see if I can do a whole new career at this age. I'm up there in my golden years, as they say, and I've always written songs, and I've always played music. I'm a guitar player and keyboard player, but I got serious about it about 7 years ago and decided I want to see if I can do this professionally, and I'm having the time of my life, as I said, and getting some success. So it's cool. I've written with hit songwriters and I've written with non-hit songwriters. I've learned to co-write, which I always wrote songs on my own, and it's a skill and a thing on most music and pop music and country music. People co-write, just like Lennon and McCartney. Usually it's 3 people in country music. So I wrote a lot of country music, and I've written a lot of pop and rock and rap and R&B and cool things. So stuff in TV and movies. And I just had a song in a movie called Love in Tahiti. It was one of those romance movies, and my song was the first song in the movie. It's great. It's called No Ceiling.
That's cool. So cool. That's great. Great to hear. Yeah. You probably use some of your family therapy skills in the co-writing experiences.
It's like a therapy session has been a co-writing thing, because people just reveal their hearts and their deepest wounds and their deepest joys and their passions. And I'm good at facilitating getting to that level with people, because I was comfortable being there with people emotionally, for years. And again, I have, the experience of what rings true in relationships, and also the perspective of having lived a bunch of years and seen a bunch of lives and stories played out. And I have a facility for words too. I love words, and, I've written a bunch of books and used to write poetry. And so, I bring words to it. So I sometimes write the music, and sometimes I just write the words. And so I've become more of a word specialist when I've co-writing. So cool.
Great. Anything else you want to mention before we wrap it up today?
I think it's a different era. When I started in couples and family therapy, it was kind of new, because it was so individually focused. And I think, therapy has always been a bit individually focused, but I think now most people, it was a bit of a stigma when I was growing up. You didn't go to therapy and you didn't talk about going to therapy. You only went in the most severe circumstances. And you definitely didn't talk about going to couples therapy and were reluctant to go to couples therapy. People are a lot more open about it now. And I think that's a good trend. People are like, you need to, friends have problems, you need to go to couples therapy. It's much more accepted. And I think that's a great thing. We're going into that era where it's not so stigmatized to want to get help and to get help. And people have seen their, friends or family relationships go, by the wayside, and they're willing to do something about it. I think that's a great trend. I hope it keeps going, and I think it will. We need to be effective as clinicians, as therapists, to offer the right kind of help. So, the word spreads that you can fix a relationship and get it better and, move to a better place, even when you're in deep trouble. So I think that's cool. And I love that you're doing this podcast to spread the word.
Yeah, absolutely. And I totally agree. I think the world's going to need a lot more couples therapists. And I think it particularly needs therapists who know what they're doing. So I really
Yes.
appreciate having these types of conversations and this conversation with you to share your wisdom and help, people who are doing the work to be more effective. So thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for inviting me. Good to see you again. And you stay cold up there in the
Yeah.
Northeast, and I will stay warm down here in the Caribbean and gloat just a little. That'll
Yeah.
be part of the pleasure of spending the winter down in the Caribbean. So
Yeah, I'm very jealous. Yeah, I hope you enjoy the winter down there. Definitely.
I already am, and I intend to more. That's my pool right there, and I go in several times a day when I get a little too hot.
That's great. That's great. Well, thank you so much, Bill. Hopefully we can catch up again at some point. All right. Thank you so much, Bill. I'm just so grateful for you generously taking the time to come on and chat again. Like I said at the beginning, I just think so much of you, and I love having these conversations with you. I feel like I could talk with you for hours and soak in all of your wisdom. And so I'm really grateful for that. And thank you to all you listeners out there. Definitely go to billohanlon.com. Maybe check out some of his songs that he has going on. And I'd be super grateful if you have a moment to leave a rating or a review on iTunes or Spotify or wherever you listen to the show. That'd be really helpful. And I'm just so grateful for all of your support out there. Also, if you're interested, this episode is sponsored by the Couples Therapist Inner Circle, which is the membership site that I created about working with couples. And, at this point, there's hundreds of hours of content to help you become a better couples therapist. If you're just starting out, it's a really great way to get going. If you are a very experienced therapist, it's a great way to get education on working with affairs, working with high conflict couples, working with emotionally focused therapy, relational life therapy, all kinds of different things. And there's a really cool new way that I'm setting it up, which is that you can do an add-on bonus to your inner circle, which is about the business of couples therapy. And it's all about building a profitable couples therapy practice. And I'm really excited. I've been working with a bunch of people on building their practice, starting a podcast, being on social media more, all kinds of different goals that people have for themselves, how to use marketing. And so I'm excited about that. If that's something that appeals to you, definitely click on it in the show notes. And if you're just interested in the clinical side, then you can get that option. If you want to get the business side, then you can get the clinical plus the business. So there's something for everyone there. And also, there, please join the free Couples Therapist Couch Facebook group. If that's where you're at in your career, you just want to join the free group. That's another great resource to take advantage of. And I'm always grateful for ratings and reviews on wherever you listen to podcasts. Really appreciate that. This is Shane Birkel, and this is the Couples Therapist Couch, the podcast that's all about the practice of couples therapy. I look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks, everybody.